Valentine's is right around the corner, and who needs a man to buy you chocolate when you can make some yourself? And maybe buy a box to munch on when you make your fake chocolates. Welcome back everyone, my name is Kylie the Curly Crafter, and today we are going to be making a super fun fake box of chocolates. These chocolates are super easy to make and beyond realistic. So if you want to make a scrumptious looking realistic little chocolate decoration, then stay tuned and let's start making this box of chocolates. First and foremost, in order to make a chocolate box, you are actually going to need a chocolate box. So I got mine for super cheap at Ross and it was only $8. It was perfect for me to make the chocolates because you are actually going to remove all the chocolates from the inside and we are going to use that to replicate them exactly and make a mold. The box is actually a part of the craft we are doing, so we are going to remove the edible chocolate out so that we can clean it and put the fake chocolate inside of it, but also save your real chocolate because we are going to make a mold out of it using this silicone rubber kit. I will link it in the description if you guys are interested, but it comes with two parts. It comes with part A and part B because we mix them together in a bowl and kind of pour it over the chocolate and it'll form around it and make a really cool mold. So that's what we are going to work on now. For making the actual mold, there are several other things that you are going to need, including some contact paper. You're also going to need some tape. I'm going to use this cookie cutter, and then last but not least, you are going to need a hot glue gun. So the thing with the contact paper that I find, I've actually made a video making these molds, but I've used tape and it didn't work as well in my opinion. I feel like the contact paper actually just latched onto the chocolate better than the tape ever really did. So in my opinion, I definitely recommend using contact paper, but I will also link my other video on silicone mold making down in the description. So what you do is just lay out your contact paper and then tape it down onto the counter or your surface just so it doesn't slide around. The thing that I find with the contact paper is the longer your chocolates sit on it, the more it adheres to it. So if you place all your chocolate on there and just let it sit for 10 minutes before making the actual mold, I feel like it's definitely more of a possibility that your chocolate will stay, because I have had incidents where the chocolates or whatever I'm making will start to float up in the silicone, but I haven't had that problem with contact paper. So once again, definitely try contact paper. And then once your contact paper is taped down to your surface and you have your container or your little cookie cutter onto your contact paper, you can just array all of your candies inside. Another thing that I find worth mentioning is whatever container or cookie cutter you're using, make sure it has enough space on the inside so the candies aren't too close to the edge or too close to be touching each other, because then it could create problems and the silicone will be too thin, fall apart, or even create holes where the pieces will seep in together and kind of mesh and form as one piece of chocolate, and it just won't look as good. So definitely make sure you have plenty of room. I cannot stress enough, this is one of the most crucial make or break moments when creating the base foundation of your silicone mold. You need to make sure that none of the silicone will seep through the bottom of your cookie cutter, because if it does, your silicone will be all over your table instead of in the cute little chocolate form that you want. So make sure you really coat the outside corners, draping down from the cookie cutter and onto the contact paper, are fully coated in glue. I personally go around a couple times just to make sure that it is fully sealed, because once again, I've had an accident where my tabletop would be completely covered in silicone, and trust me, it is not a fun thing to do. So now you are just going to get prepared to actually make the silicone, throw on your gloves, and get your little mixture ready. I like to use this little container and I stir with popsicle sticks. And then you are also going to need your 2 parts. I like to set the weight scale by grams, and make sure you're measuring your 1-to-1 ratio by weight, not by like the amount that you pour, because the weight is actually the mixture you need, and that's also a factor that could create like a bad silicone mold. So just add your 1-to-1 ratio and make sure you mix enough to fully like cover maybe a 1/2 inch to 1 inch on top of the chocolate, because you don't want the bottom of your silicone mold to be too thin. It all depends on the instructions for your silicone kit, but mine calls for mixing it about 5 minutes, so that's what I'm going to do here. I sped it up, but make sure you mix pretty slowly because you don't want too many bubbles in your mixture, or else you'll have like a bubbly and like oddly textured silicone mold that could also mess with how your chocolates come out. So make sure you're very careful with stirring, but also make sure it is fully incorporated. And then once that is all ready, we can pour it slowly on top of our chocolates, just kind of like in a steady spot in the center. I find that this method, as soon as your silicone is dry, is also super easy to disassemble. I just rip off the contact paper, the glue slides right off your cookie cutter, and then you can just use your finger and pop out the mold and then pop out the candies. Super simple, and then you have like the most perfect and most detailed chocolate silicone mold ever. In this particular DIY, I'm trying to replicate the chocolates exactly, so if you guys don't really want to, you can toss your chocolates because they're definitely not food safe anymore. You cannot eat them. They've been drenched and saturated in silicone. But I just kept mine aside so that I can use them to kind of match the colors and mix paint colors to replicate them when I actually paint my little pieces of chocolate. And look at how glorious this mold turned out. Chef's kiss. Now that we made the mold for the chocolates, and before we actually make them, I would like to pop in and say I am selling them on my Etsy shop. So you could get one of these super fun fake chocolate boxes yourself if you would like it. I have 2 patterns, this one with the pretty design and also one with roses. Or you can make them yourself. In that case, let's get back to the video. As for the chocolates themselves, I'm just using the good old plaster of Paris. I like using plaster of Paris for anything that I need to do inside of a silicone mold because it's just so easy to whip up and just release from the mold. So basically, plaster of Paris is 2 parts of the powder and 1 part cold water, so you are going to need something to mix and measure in. If you don't have a measuring cup, just draw a line on a cup kind of like this, and then you measure 2 times to that line with the powder and then 1 time to that line with the water, just as an idea so that you don't have to buy a specific measuring cup for this, because once you use it with plaster, you definitely can't use it back in the kitchen. I'm just going to use this little plastic one though, and I only had enough plaster of Paris to make it to a half a cup, I think. So then I just filled it to a half a cup, and then when I added in the cold water, I just added in the water like halfway up to the 1 cup mark. Once you have your water, get ready to mix because it's going to start almost dissolving instantly, but you are going to want to mix it. There's not really a specific amount of time that you need to mix your plaster and water. Just try to make sure that the powder is fully dissolved into the water. I do know that when you're mixing it, it does have like some clumps, and I don't think you can get out all of the clumps. Just try to make it as smooth as possible. And once that is all mixed up, you can slowly pour it into your silicone mold and fill it up all the way to the top, creating the cutest and most realistic, super detailed little chocolate pieces. Because of the unique silicone mold or some of the clumps, you can have air pockets at the bottom, and you definitely don't want that because it won't come out as good. So a little trick that you can do is just kind of like shake the mold, or if it's a larger mold, you can tap it just to kind of smooth out any rough bumps. Now, I don't let it completely dry. I mean, it is pretty much hardened, but like you pull out your mold when there's like a thin kind of line of water at the top where it hasn't like fully completely dried, just because that little thin layer of water just helps it slip right out of the silicone mold, which is probably like a couple hours, maybe 30 minutes to 2 hours these have been drying. And then once you pull them out, I would definitely not paint them or mess with them until like the next day or a couple days later, just to make sure it is like bone dry. So when it does come to painting them, if you don't use the recommended like oil-based paint and you use acrylic, they soak up paint and it takes like several coats, and they are very fragile if you don't like finish them off with Mod Podge. So just make sure if you make custom mixtures to make plenty of it, to do several coats and also some drizzling. The colors I decided to use was nutmeg brown. I also used chocolate bar, and I think it was brown oxide. And if you needed to darken it for like more of the dark chocolate, you could use the shade black, and just not too much of it because you don't want it to be overly black. So when it did come to the like milk chocolate, I found that the simple plain brown oxide was like the perfect color. But for like a darker dark chocolate, I kind of mixed all four of them together just to kind of create like a deeper and more rich chocolate shade. This part also comes down to preference with the colors you pick out. I know some chocolate is shiny and some chocolate is more on the matte side. I know the fake chocolates that I made are more shiny than the originals, but in my opinion, it also looks like super nice that way, so I really enjoy it, but just keep that in mind. These are the original real chocolate, and as you can see on the darker chocolate, it has more of a milk chocolate drizzle and vice versa. So I'm using my custom colors of paint to actually scoop into a little Ziploc bag. The Ziploc bag is acting as a piping bag, but I used a piece of Ziploc because I didn't want to use a piping tip, because I only needed to cut out just the very tiniest, like super small dot of a corner out because of how fine the drizzle is. So make sure you definitely don't cut too big of a hole. Just put the paint inside a Ziploc, push it down to the corner, and just make the smallest little snip. And then you can use that little makeshift piping bag to drizzle on your little chocolate. Since I made a silicone mold and the chocolate that was in the mold had already had the drizzle, so when you use the plaster of Paris and the chocolates came out, there was already like a textured line for the drizzle. So realistically, if you wanted to, you could just paint it, but in my opinion, I just made it look more realistic by using the drizzle. But I also tried to like follow the lines that were already there and cover them up so it didn't look as weird. Just look how realistic these chocolates came out. For example, here is one of my fake ones next to the real one. Can you guess which one is real and which one's fake? Well, actually the answer is the real one is on the right. So let's see if you got that. Here are some other ones that are the real next to their fake ones. As you can see, the real are kind of more dull. But I just took all the fake ones, and to protect them and make them all sealed together, I took some spray Mod Podge and just gave it like a couple coats just to make sure like the paint wouldn't chip off, because it is on plaster and it's harder for like the acrylic paint to adhere. Just throw them in a box. You can even glue them down because you don't want somebody to go over, pick them up and take a bite. But that is all you have to do to make the stinking cutest little Valentine's chocolate box. I hope that you guys like this fake heart-shaped chocolate box as much as I do to satisfy your loving festive desires for this season. They turned out way better than I thought they would have, and I love them so much. Also, if you guys want to purchase them, once again, I will link my Etsy shop down in the description for you guys, and I will see you in my next video. Bye, everyone!